Hello and welcome to season 64 of the Dominion League. Our first match was against Breppert, and this is the feature game from that match for a few reasons. One, the kingdom analysis for this game is a little bit different from what we usually do. Two, it shows a relatively new mechanic in Dominion, the rotating piles. And three, it shows the importance of identifying your priority and doing your best to get there. Let's start with the kingdom analysis. We have plus actions supplied by Landing Party and Mountain Village. Gondola can also help ease terminal collision. We have plus cards supplied by Landing Party and Sybil. Sybil is not displayed here because it is part of the rotating pile. However, I've included it so that you can see that Sybil indeed does draw cards. We have trashing provided by Exorcist and Forge. We have gain provided by Devil's Workshop, maybe Exorcist, maybe Rogue, maybe Bureaucrat. And the plus buy is another Augur, the Herb Gatherer. However, this one is at the top of the pile, so it is accessible from the beginning of the game. Now, the part of the kingdom that makes the kingdom analysis a little bit different from usual is the landmark wall. Wall imposes a harsh penalty on large decks. You get -1 VP for every card in your deck at the end of the game beyond 15. This makes me want to build a deck that is as lean as possible. In other words, I want to get to a province or two provinces with as few cards in my deck as possible. For instance, if my deck is made of 3 gold only, I can buy the province with that. However, if I have to use silvers and coppers, I would need to use more cards. And eventually the wall would catch up to that deck faster than the deck with just 3 gold in it. So the lean deck I had in mind at the beginning here involved using landing parties for draw, and perhaps I would draw into a couple gold and a silver to buy province, combined with a Forge. The Forge trashes much more quickly than the Exorcist and will get rid of all my starting cards. Additionally, Forge can forge away 2 landing parties to give me 1 province. I exchange 2 cards for 1. That's a 7-point play, which might be relevant in the end game. With that in mind, let's see what we choose to buy on our turn 1. Well, we have 2 on our turn 1, so we will buy nothing. The estate is certainly not worth it. This is an unhappy start for me. I was considering on the 3-4 to get a Herb Gatherer and an Exorcist. The Herb Gatherer is important for a couple of reasons. One, it is the only source of plus buy in the kingdom. While plus buy means you'll be putting more cards into your deck, it still might be useful near the end of the game or to build up during the middle to get maybe double province or to get a couple landing parties, which you can then forge away. So the plus buy isn't terrible here, and considering it's the only source of plus buy, I would like to get a Herb Gatherer. The second reason is that the Herb Gatherer controls the rotating pile. When you play the Herb Gatherer, you have the option to rotate past them and reveal the cards that are below the Herb Gatherer. If you do not have a Herb Gatherer, you do not have control over that pile. In other words, if only your opponent has control over the pile, they may be able to play in such a way that only they are able to access certain cards from that pile. And you will be unable to access cards from that pile. It might be okay depending on the kingdom, but it might not be okay at the same time. That would have been what my choice on 3, the Herb Gatherer, combined with an Exorcist. But I have the 2-5, so now I have to reconsider how I want to go about things. My opponent does have the 3-4, and they do get the Herb Gatherer. I don't go for the Rogue here. The Rogue does nothing. Next to nothing for me. I may trash my opponent's Herb Gatherer, but that's not helping me do anything. Instead, I decide to get an Exorcist on 5 to help with the trashing. In particular, I want to hit estates with the Exorcist to gain wisps. The wisps will draw the copper. It'll get me just a little bit closer to the forge that I want to have that thin deck. My opponent also gets an Exorcist on 4. I have another hand with just 2 coppers in it. So while this is nice for the wall, this is not ideal, I think. I would like to be building up a little bit here before I start passing, just to avoid the wall penalty. We do nothing on turn 1 and we do nothing on turn 3. Pass it back to my opponent. Their Herb Gatherer comes out. They rotate away from me. In other words, they said Visionar, you will get no plus buy this game and you will have no control over the Augurs. Now the Acolyte is revealed. My opponent gains a silver and they are also able to trash an estate into a Will-O-Wisp. And the Acolyte is actually quite useful to me here. I understand why my opponent rotated away from the Herb Gatherers to deny me control and plus buy, but I do like the Acolyte because it is an easy way for me to gain a gold. The other way would have been through the Devil's Workshop, but the Acolyte will also trash the estate while gaining me the gold. So there, I don't trash with the Exorcist. I could have trashed and bought a silver, but I thought the Acolyte was more important because the gold is more important, because the Forge is most important, because Wall is the most warping card in the kingdom. That's the thought process. Over to breppert now. They also buy an Acolyte, probably with similar ideas in mind of hitting Forge as soon as possible. I have 4 and I buy a Devil's Workshop. You generally don't want to gain too many cards in wall games, but the Devil's Workshop is here primarily to gain landing parties for the draw. Something with Forge is that it loves big hand sizes, and what happens with the landing parties is that they stay out of play until you decide to top deck them by playing a treasure first. In other words, I could have 2 or 3 landing parties out of play, and if I know the Forge is in the back of the deck, I could easily stack the 3 of them on top of the deck, have a huge hand size, and get a big Forge off to give me a huge advantage. I think the landing parties are very important, so we get the Devil's Workshop to gain those, even though it might mean a tiny ping from the wall. Another Herb Gatherer play for my opponent. They rotate past the Acolytes into the Sorceresses now. Sorceress is a cursor. Fortunately here, my opponent does not have 5 to buy a Sorceress, but they do have 4 to gain a Devil's Workshop, and they trash another estate into a Will-O-Wisp. So now they've trashed 2 estates. I've trashed none. I've trashed no cards from my deck. But we keep going. Forge can fix all of that, so I'm not too upset by the lack of trashing so far. I now am able to trash an estate. I buy a silver because money for Forge for wall. Couple of wisps come out for my opponent. Herb Gatherer puts the deck in the discard. They buy a Sorceress. My opponent is serious about cursing me here. We need to get that Forge very quickly. Devil's Workshop for them, and they opt to gain a Mountain Village. Might be useful, depends on when it shows up in the shuffle. Here's the Acolyte. It shows up with an estate, so I'm able to trash that, gain a gold, and I'm also able to trash the Acolyte to gain a Sorceress. Very happy about that. I also would like to return the purples back to my opponent. Trash a copper with the Exorcist, gain an imp with the Devil's Workshop. I'm happy with a few imps in the deck. My opponent picks up a second Sorceress here. Starting to get a little bit worried because I haven't picked up the Forge yet. And a Devil's Workshop gains the Cabin Boy. I was a little bit confused with the Cabin Boy. I wasn't sure what the Cabin Boy was for. The only things you can gain are landing parties, which is good, but just buy the landing party now if you want it that badly. Or a Gondola. And the gondola didn't seem particularly impressive to me. Anyways, we move on. 5 here. Now, this could be another sorceress for me. My opponent has 2. Maybe I can have 2 and then we split the curses 5-5, something like that. However, I will not buy a sorceress because that would reveal the Sibyls for my opponent and they would have first choice over the Sibyls. I do not want to do that, so we avoid the sorceress and instead I get a landing party. While I don't have the herb gatherer to control the pile in this case, because there is only one sorceress left, I did have some kind of control over whether or not the Sibyls should be revealed. I rather leave that for my opponent to reveal, and then I would try to pick up some Sibyls after that. The Wisp works very nicely with the sorceress, it turns out. So the Wisp showed them there was a mountain village on top of the deck. As such, the sorceress is able to curse me with 100% reliability. Herb Gatherer goes and finds a silver. The Acolyte comes out, gains a Sibyl. Full Augur display here for my opponent. Tremendous. And not only are they able to gain a Sibyl, but they are also able to buy a second Sibyl. So they cannot lose the Sibyl split. They have 2 of them. And it seems very unlikely that I will be able to gain 2 Sibyls on my turn here. Starting to look a little bleak for me at this point, I'd say. Imp into Wisp gets me to 6, so I buy 1 Sibyl, and Devil's Workshop will gain me another landing party. Breppert's sorceresses, well, one of them misses, the other one hits by guessing a copper off the top of the deck. Luckily, they don't find 6, they only find 3, and they buy a silver, trashing a copper with the Exorcist. There, I would have bought a landing party. Anyways, my sorceress, I'm lucky to guess a copper off the top of the deck here, and I draw into 6. Now I have the option here. I could trash, gain an imp, buy a landing party, could trash a copper, buy a landing party. But the Sibyl is important, because draw is important, because forge is important, because wall is very important. Take the Sibyl, hold up on the trashing for now, with the hope that all the draw that I've put into the deck, 2 Sibyls now, 2 landing parties, will allow me a clean trash with the forge. Well, first of all, it'll allow me to buy the forge, and then it'll give me an ability to trash many cards with the forge. Not a great turn for my opponent here, just a herb gatherer. They do rotate. Again, they take the plus buy away from me. I completely understand, and at this point, most of the good cards from that pile are gone, so I'm not interested in getting a second Acolyte. It'll probably stay there for the rest of the game. 5 for my opponent. Goes for a second Exorcist, and I don't know what that is about. The Devil's Workshop does gain a landing party. I do know what that is about, though. I know what that's for. I'm not sure what the second Exorcist is for, though. Imp here can be on Sibyl first or on Will-O-Wisp. You can't exactly stack the deck with Sibyl so that the Will-O-Wisp always draws an extra card. Luckily, the Wisp drew here. Then the Sibyl allows me to top deck a landing party, so the Sorceress knows what to find. Land a curse in my opponent's deck. Second landing party finds me my second Sibyl, and I am now spoilt for choice here with this massive hand size. What I end up deciding to do is buy the forge, obviously, but I will go ahead and gain a ghost here. The gold has served its purpose. I was able to get enough money to buy a forge. So now I will trash the gold into a more useful card, which is the ghost. Devil's Workshop gets me a second imp. Herb Gatherer again for my opponent. That is not a good turn for them at all. They just have 4 and they go ahead, buy a cabin boy, trash an estate to gain a wisp. Fortunately, I see the Sibyl at the top of the shuffle here, so play the Sibyl. This isn't a great hand. I'm able to curse my opponent though, which is useful, maybe. Not entirely sure. We won't buy anything on 2 coins. I could gain a gold here with the Devil's Workshop, but I rather have the landing party. So I gain the wisp. then gain the landing party. Then Ghost fortunately reveals the Imp. The worst case scenario there was Ghost revealing Forge. Took the chance, it paid off. Now I get to probably have a very big trash with the Forge here. My opponent curses me again. I'm clearly losing the curse split, but that should be fixed on this turn. A landing party for my opponent. They trash a silver into an Imp. Imp first on Wisp. Wisp draws. Imp second onto Sybil, and then my opponent resigns. The Forge were going to come through there, and I was going to have great deck control after that. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.